We continue now at the top of Daf Vav Amud Aleph in Meseches Horayos. This is Horayos Daf 6a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a Brisa, and the Brisa was discussing the procedure when the Levium took the place of the firstborns. And the Brisa darshans that we learn from Ola to Karban Chatas. This is the Karban Chatas that they brought in that specific situation. We learn from the Karban Ola over there that Af Chatas lo nechelis, that just like the Ola is not eaten, so too that particular Karban Chatas is not eaten. And the Brisa continues, and this is the relevant part of the Brisa for what we're discussing. Kayotzebo, in a similar fashion, we're going to make a similar drasha by the following Karban Chatas, the same kind of drasha that we just made by the Karban Chatas that was brought in this case of the Levium, again taking the place of the firstborns. We make a similar drasha by the following Karban Chatas. Amar Rabbi Yossi says similarly as follows. The pasuk says in Ezra, Haboim mehashvi hagola hikrivu olos lelokei Yisrael parim shnei masar v'gomer hakol ola. It says that when they came up from the exile, this is at the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, they brought a bunch of karbanos, and the pasuk ends off hakol ola. It was all karban ola. And so the Gemara asks, hakol ola sal gadaitach, do you think they're bringing all karban olos? Rashi explains, Hakol olas al gadaitach v'aksiv, but it's written in the pasuk seirei izim lechatas. It says that they brought seirei izim lechatas, so they clearly brought karban chatas as well. Efshar shechatas ola, is it possible that a karban chatas is actually an ola? That wouldn't make any sense. Ela hakol ke'ola, rather we're going to make a drasha similar to the drasha we just made. All of the karbanos, the chatas is like the ola. Ma ola lo nechelas, in this case, just like the karban ola is not eaten, av chatas lo nechelas. So too over here, when they brought these karbanos, these chatases that they brought, they were not eaten. And Rashi explains, Af chatas to yikrivu, so to the chatas that they offered, lo necheles, it's not eaten, lefi shayu seirin shel tzibur hanisrafen, because these are the male goat karbanos of the community that are burned, lefi shechnisu dam lefnai v'lefnim, because their blood is brought inside, k'dechsiv v'chol chatas, asher yuva midoma el oel moed l'chaper b'kodesh, any chatas which the blood is brought into the oel moed for a kapara, k'detanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, parim hanisrafen, when it comes to the bulls that are burned, useirim hanisrafen, and the goats that are burned, these karbanos were the male goats for the avera of avodah zara of the community. The Amar Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda says, as we'll see in a moment, al avodas kochavim heviyim. These karbanos were brought because of the sin of avodah zara, which is why it's relevant to this discussion over here in Horayos. As the Gemara now continues, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Al avodas kochavim heviyim. These particular karbonos that they were bringing when they were returning from the exile were brought because of the avera of avodah zara. V'yomer Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Al avodas kochavim she'asu b'mei tzidkiyahu. It's actually for the avodah zara that was done long before that in the times of tzidkiyahu. And the Gemara now says, B'shalom al Rabbi Yehuda, I understand according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, again Rabbi Yehuda says when you have this communal kind of sin of par helam davar shel tzibur, or a communal sin of avodah zara, so then every single tribe brings the carbon. Mashkachas lo lahani shnei masar chatos, I understand why they brought 12 carbon chatases, which is what is mentioned in the pasuk. Kegon dechatu shnei masar shvatim, for example, the 12 shvatim they all sinned. Demaisu shnei masar seirim, they're going to bring the 12 he-goats in this situation. Inami or dechatu shiva shvatim, let's say even just 7 shvatim sinned. Usha'ara inach begreira, and the rest they have to bring with greira, meaning they're dragged along, as Rabbi Yehuda says. Even in that situation, they have to bring all 12 shvatim, have to bring the carbon. According to Rabbi Shimon, also we can also understand this brisa. Kagon dechatu achar asar shvatim. We'll say that 11 of the shvatim they sinned. Demaisu achar asar seirim, that each of those tribes, the 11 tribes, are going to bring 11 seirim. V'idach debezin, and then there's one more that the court brings, according to Rabbi Shimon. Elul Rabbi Meir d'amar bezdin mevi'in v'lo tzibur, but according to Rabbi Meir, who says the court brings the carbon and not the community, so shnei masar hechi mashkachas lo. So how is it that they're bringing 12 of these karbanos? That's the reason why we're bringing this brisa, is to ask this question on Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara continues and answers, kegon dechatu v'hadar chatu. The case actually was they sinned, and then they sinned again, v'hadar chatu, and then they sinned again, ad treisar zimne. It was 12 times that they sinned, and that's why they're bringing the 12 karbanos, according to Rabbi Meir. But the Gemara continues and asks on this episode, but if the sin took place in the times of Tzidkiyo, didn't those people die who committed the sin? So how is it that you're bringing the carbon chatas for owners, so to speak, that already died? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rapapa says, Ki gemiri chatos shemesu ba'aleh b'misa. When do we say that if you have a carbon chatos where the owners die, that the animal has to be left to die and you don't bring the carbon? Hani mili b'yachad, that's true by an individual. Avalo b'tzibur, but that doesn't apply by a tzibur, by a community. Lefi she'ein misa b'tzibur, because it's not considered to be misa when it's a sin of the community, and therefore, even though they did die, this carbon can still be brought. And the Gemara continues, Manole Rapapa, where does Rapapa know this idea that if it's a carbon of the tzibor, the carbon is brought even after Misa? If you're going to say it comes from the following pasuk, the pasuk says, Tachas avosecha yubanecha, that instead of the fathers come the sons take the place of the fathers, and so therefore even death it's considered that there's a continuity with the children. But if so, afilu b'yachinami, so then that pasuk should apply even by an individual carbon. So it can't be coming from that pasuk. Rather, Rav Papa is making this inference from the sor that is brought on Rosh Chodesh, that's brought from the public funds. The Amar Achmona, because the pasuk says, Maisi mitrumas halishka, you bring it from the trumas halishka, which is the public funds. That's how you bring that carbon on Rosh Chodesh. V'hamaisi lahum Yisrael, but didn't some from Klal Yisrael already die? V'hanach depaishi hechi maisa, so the people that are left, how do they bring this carbon if some of the owners have died? Some of those owners that contributed to the public funds are not alive anymore. Rather, you see from this, chatas shemesu ba'aleha, if you have a chatas where the owners died, but tzibor, and it's a carbon tzibor, karva, you're still going to offer it. And so you see that from the sor of Rosh Chodesh. But the Gemara says, Mi dami, can you really compare the two cases? Sor Rosh Chodesh, dil malo maisu mitzibor. When it comes to the goat of Rosh Chodesh, maybe they didn't die. You don't know for sure that people from the community died. It's just something that is a suffix, it's a doubt. So it makes sense we would bring that carbon. Avalacha, but over here we're talking about the sin of Avodah Zarah at the time of Tzidkiyahu. Vadai maisu, certainly they died. So you can't compare the two cases. And so the Gemara says, Ela time de Rapapa mehacha. Rather, the reason of Rapapa is from here, from the following. Because it's written in the pasuk, Kaper li'amcha Yisrael asher podisa Hashem. It says it's going to be a kapara, and this pasuk is talking about Egla Arufa, and we learn from that pasuk, Ru'uya kapara zu shetechaper al yotzei Mitzrayim. This kapara, this atonement that happens with the procedure of the Egla Arufa. Again, the Egla Arufa is a procedure that was undertaken in a situation where a dead body was found, and so you have to measure which city was the closest, and you go through this process of the Egla Arufa as a form of kapara, and this kapara really can even be a kapara for people generations ago, from Yotzei Mitzrayim. Midachsiv, how do we know that? Because it's written Asher Padisa, that you redeemed, and so we say the kapara can even go back generations, and so you see, in a situation of a tzibor, you see that it can go back generations, even if the owners, so to speak, have died. But the Gemara says, Mi dummy, but can you really compare the two? Hasam over there by Egla Arufa, Kulu Isnan, Migo de Mechapra Chayim, Mechapra Nami Amesim. Over here, the main point of Egla Arufa is for the people that are standing here right now alive, and since there's a kapara for those who are alive, it's a kapara for those who have died in previous generations as well. Elahacha, but over here, Mi Havachayim, is there anyone really that's alive at the time of the Aveira of the Avodah Zarah? Here it's a whole new generation entering for the second Beis HaMikdash. But the Gemara says, no, inachinami, yes, indeed, there were some people still alive from that time. The Chsiv, as it's written, v'ravim mehakohanim v'halavim v'rashei avos v'gomer, it says there were still people from the times of the Beis HaMikdash, of the first Beis HaMikdash. But the Gemara says, v'dilma mu'atin have it, v'lo rabim have it, but maybe that was just a minority of the people and not the majority of the people, so still, how can that really count? And the Gemara says to that, Haksiv, it's written in the pasuk, Truas hasimcha l'chol b'chi ha'am v'hakol nishma ad l'mei rachok. It says there was crying and there was celebration. The crying was from those who had seen the first Beis HaMikdash, and it says that the crying was louder than the celebration, than the simcha, and so therefore you see that actually it was a majority, though they did comprise a majority, those who came from the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'ham mezidin have it, but this whole thing doesn't make sense, because these karbanos for Avodah Zarah are brought in situations where it's done by mistake, and in this situation the Avera was done on purpose, so the whole thing doesn't really make sense. And the Gemara says, in that regard, Horayos Daf, it's true, but this was just a ruling that was just for this time. It's true that the karbanos are not entirely appropriate because it was a situation of Mesechet, but there was a Horayos Daf, there was a ruling just for this temporary time period that we would bring the karbanos in this fashion. And the Gemara says, Hachanam Mistabra, it makes sense to say that there was a Horayos Daf over here. The Lote Mahachi, because if you don't say that, the pasuk mentions Elim Tishim, Vishisha, Kvasim Shivim Vishiva. It talks about the rams, and there's 96, and the sheep that were 77 of them. Keneged me, what does that correspond to? Ela Horayos Shah, obviously it was some kind of Horayos Shah. Hachanami Horayos Shah. So here also it was a Horayos Shah. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Meis Echad min hatzibur, let's say somebody from the community died in a situation of Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, Chayavin, so they're still obligated to bring the carbon. But Echad mi Bezdin, but if one of the members of the court died, Peturin, then they are exempt from bringing that carbon. And the Gemara says, Man Tana, who's the author of this Braisa? Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Amar Rav. Rav Chisda says that Rabbi Zera says that Rav Yirmiyah says that Rav says, Rabbi Meir, the author of this Braisa is Rabbi Meir, to Amar Bezdin Meviyim Velo Tzibur, because Rabbi Meir says it's the Bezdin that brings the carbon of the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur and not the community. Hilkach, therefore, Meis Echad min hatzibur, if one of the people from the community die, Chayavin, so there's still an obligation to bring the carbon. To HaKoim Kulei Bezdin, because the Bezdin is still entirely around. But Meis Echad mi Bezdin, but if one of the members of the court dies, so Peturin, then they are exempt. To have a Lachatas Shemeis Echad min hashutfin, this would be an example of a carbon chatas where one of the partners dies. The members of the Bezdin are all considered partners. Umisham Hachi Peturin, and for this reason, they are exempt. And the Gemara continues, Maskef lo Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asks the following question: V'nukma Rabbi Shimon. Why not say that this brisa follows Rabbi Shimon? Diamar Bezdin im hatzibur. Rabbi Shimon says that both the Bezdin and the tzibur, they both bring the karbonos by Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. And then we could say as follows: Meis Echad min hatzibur. If one of the members of the community dies, chayav, and then they're still obligated. De'in tzibur meisam, because there's a general rule again that the tzibur is not considered to have died. But Meis Echad mi Bezdin peturin. But if one of the members of the court dies, then they're exempt. Damrinan, like we say, the chatas shutfin, that chatas is a chatas of partners, and therefore again you say there's an exemption in that case. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya, Abaya said to him, the reason why we're not saying the Bryce is Rabbi Shimon is because Shaminon Leila Rabbi Shimon, we have heard that Rabbi Shimon holds the Amar Chatos Shutfin Eina Mesa. Rabbi Shimon actually holds that a Chatos of partners, it is not left to die. There would not be an exemption in that situation if one of the partners dies. And where do we see that? The Tanya, as we learned in the following Brysa, Par Visor Shal Yom HaKippurim, the bull and the goat that are brought on Yom Kippur, Sha'avdu, let's say they get lost. You separate others instead, you bring those substitutes, and then you find the other ones. Yamusu kulan, they all have to die. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, they say, Yiru, they do not die, they're just left to graze. Lafisha ein chatos tzibor mesa, because the chatos of the community is not left to die. And Rashi explains, Shaminan Leila Rabbi Shimon Da'amar Chatas Hashutfin Eina Mesa. Rabbi Shimon holds that a Chatas of partners does not die. The Tanya Par V'Sar Shal Yom HaKippurim Sha'avdu V'Hifresh Acherem Tachteim. That we learned in a Bryce, if you have the Par and the Sar of Yom Kippur, that they get lost and others are separated instead, V'Nischapru Behen, and the atonement is taken care of with the substitutes. V'Achar Gach Nimtzu Ha'avudim, and then you find the ones that were lost. Kulan Yamusu Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, so they have to die according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, but Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, they say, Yiru, you leave them to graze until they develop a blemish, and you don't say they are left to die. Now over here, the Par Shal Yom HaKippurim, what is this Par of Yom Kippur? The Hainu Par Shal Aaron, that's the Par that belongs to Aaron. Have a Chatas HaShutvin, that actually is a Chatas of partners. The Kohanim is Chaprim Bo, because the Kohanim are considered partners, they get a Kapar with it. The Kamer Rabbi Shimon Yiru, and Rabbi Shimon says it should be left to graze. The Lo have a Kechatas Shekipru Ba'alma, it's not like a regular Chatas where the owners already had atonement. The Lamisa Azla, which is left to die. Mishum the Chatas Shutfis Lav Kechatas Yochid Damya, because if it's a Chatas of partners, it's not the same as an individual Chatas, Elo Kechatas Tzibor Damya. Rather, it has the status of a Chatas of the community. V'hu adin kimes echad min hashutfin, and the same would be, let's say, one of the shutfin died. The lo kechatas shemesu ba'alei adami, it would not be a chatas that the owner died. It wouldn't be considered to have that status. El chatas hashutfin, he would be considered a chatas of partners. Ve'eino meis, and it would not be left to die. And Rashi notes, v'hacha, now over here on Yom Kippur, hu dekamar yiru. So there we're going to say that it's left to graze, mishum de hakipru ba'aleh, because it happens to be a case where the atonement was already taken care of. Aval de meis echad min hashutfin, but let's say in our case where one of the partners dies, eimolach desvir leila Rabbi Shimon de karva. There we would say that Rabbi Shimon holds he actually offered the carbon still. The chatas hashutfin eina mesa, because again you don't leave it to die by a chatas hashutfin. In any case, hilkach lo mesukma Rabbi Shimon. That's why we can't say that this brisa follows Rabbi Shimon. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says back to Abaya, Kohanim Ko'amrit, you're trying to bring a proof from Rabbi Shimon by the case of Kohanim to say that Chatas Shutfin, according to Rabbi Shimon, Eina Mesa. You can't bring a proof from Kohanim. Shani Kohanim, it's different by Kohanim, Di Ikru Kol, because Kohanim are actually considered to be a Kol. That's considered to be a congregation, and so therefore they really are considered to fully be a Tzibur. It's not just a situation of Chatas Shutfin. T'chsiv, as it's written, Ala Kohanim, V'al Kol Am HaKohol Yechaper, it talks about the Kohanim, and the Am HaKol, so you can't really bring a proof from this case. Rashi explains, Amar le Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says to him, Kohanim, Kohamrit, you're bringing a proof from Kohanim. Shani Kohanim, it's different by Kohanim. The Ikru Kol, they're called the congregation. The Chsiv ala Kohanim, Kol Am HaKol Yechaper, the Iskish L'Kol. That's a comparison to Kol. The Kevon, the Ikru Kol, since that's called the Kol, Mishum Hachi Kam Rabbi Shimon. That's why Rabbi Shimon says, the Parchatas Didhu Kechatas Soyer, that the Parchatas, their Parchatas, is similar to the Chatas Soyer to Kol. It's similar to the Chatas Soyer of the congregation dummy. That's what it's compared to. The Eina Mesa, that it's not left to die. Aval Bechatas HaShutvin, but it could be by Chatas HaShutvin. Liolam Eimolach Tesvir Leila Rabbi Shimon. Then we could say that Rabbi Shimon holds Techi Mesa Echad Min HaShutvin, the low karva, that if one of the partners dies, it's not offered. Vechi Mesa Echad Min Bezdin Potter, and therefore if one of the members of the court dies, we would say exempt. V'akati Nukmak Rabbi Shimon, and we could still say that this brisa follows Rabbi Shimon, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Vav Amid Beis.